Welcome to Moonlit Insomniac. You are about to be carried into another time, where story and stillness weave together. As you listen, gentle sounds will surround you. Water flowing, lanterns flickering, footsteps soft upon stone. Beneath it all runs something quieter still. Subtle currents designed to ease what your body and mind no longer need to hold. If you stay until the end, you'll find yourself lighter, calmer, and more at rest, as though the night itself has gathered you into its arms. Now, let the journey begin. Chapter 1. Morning Light in the Garden. The year is 1372. My name is Omar. The sun has only just risen above the ridges of the Sierra Nevada, sending soft gold across the city of Granada. The air is cool still, touched with dew, and the sky glows in pale shades of ivory and rose. I step quietly into the garden, its gates newly opened, and the fragrance of jasmine greets me as though it has been waiting all through the night for this moment. The walls around me shine white with fresh lime plaster, their surfaces damp from the water poured to keep them cool through summer's heat. Shadows of lattice and vine stretch long across the tiled paths, moving gently as the morning breeze stirs the leaves. I pause, my hand resting on the carved stone, feeling its grain beneath my fingertips, a reminder that every piece of this place has been shaped with care. Already, the garden is alive. A gardener bends by the water channel, his hands guiding the flow into smaller streams that feed the beds of herbs and flowers. He carries a simple wooden tool, worn smooth from years of use, and he works with a rhythm that seems as natural as breathing. The water is life, and here in Andalusia, water is the language of paradise. The rulers of this city asked the mountains to give their gifts, and so channels were cut, shaped and tended. Stone and clay persuaded into courses that bring snowmelt and spring water to us. Without it, the courtyards would be pale and empty. With it, the earth becomes a promise kept. From the kitchens nearby, I hear the faint clatter of clay pots and the voices of women preparing the first meal of the day. The scent of bread, warm and faintly sweet, drifts across the air. In their baskets lie sprigs of mint, wild thyme and bitter orange leaves, herbs gathered from the garden itself. These are not only flavors but remedies. Mint to soothe, thyme to warm the chest, orange leaf to settle a heart running too fast. Andalusia keeps such knowledge close. Mothers teaching daughters, healers sharing simples, scholars collecting what is true and what is beautiful until the two cannot be told apart. A boy in a saffron tunic sweeps the path ahead of me. His broom is made of bound reeds. It whispers against the tiles in a soft, unhurried hush. The sound is steady and sure. Sweep, sweep, sweep. A morning rhythm that settles the mind. He lifts his head to smile, and I notice the pale blue of fresh glaze caught on the rim of a water jug by the fountain. Indigo stains a potter's hands for days, and I think of the workshops beyond the palace. Wheels spinning, clay turning, kilns opening at dawn to reveal bowls and jars shining like small moons. I move toward a horseshoe arch, its curves painted with threads of cobalt and gold. The patterns are patient, infinite, stars folding into stars, lines meeting and parting like streams. Geometry is a prayer you can trace with your eyes. It says, look deeper and you will find more. It says, what repeats is not dull, but trustworthy. It says, the world is held together by a kindness so exact it becomes beauty. In the shade of the arcade, a scribe sits cross-legged with a reed pen, the tip of it resting on a small dish of ink. On the page, the letters flow across the line in graceful, measured strokes. He pauses often, not to hurry the words, but to keep them from running ahead of their meaning. I can't tell if it is a poem or a line of wisdom, only that it moves like water when read. In Granada, men meet beneath lamplight to speak of the sky, of medicine, of numbers that are also music. A traveler once told me that knowledge rides the same roads as spice and silk. I have believed it ever since. Near the fountain, an old man kneels on a cushion to adjust a small brass spout, the water changing tone as it falls. A higher, brighter thread joining the pool's slow hush. The fountain teaches in its own way. If the flow is too strong, the sound shouts and the mind will not rest. If too faint, the water starves and the plants lean toward thirst. Measure, balance, give and return. The garden repeats these truths until the body knows them without words. I sit on the low marble edge, the stone cool through my robe. When I dip my hand, the water takes my reflection and folds it gently until my face is not mine alone, but light and movement. Ripples carry arches and sky outward. The world breaks apart and then becomes itself again. The pool smells faintly of stone and the sweetness of the channel where mint grows in green clumps and tiny bees hover, their bodies dusted gold. Beyond the cypress row, I hear a stringed instrument being tuned, a short bright note, then another, until the air settles around a soft, low song. A man leans against a column, his lute cradled, a thin silk scarf loose at his throat. He plucks quietly, not to draw a crowd, but to polish the morning with a little music. The notes are small and clear. They climb the arch and vanish like birds. A young girl carrying figs on a tray passes by, her steps measured to keep the fruit from tumbling. The figs are still cool from the shade. When their skins split, they show the same red as the pomegranate seeds the vendor will shout about later in the market. On a bench of cedar, two women sort blossoms into shallow baskets, pale rose, orange blossom, jasmine stars. Their fingers move without thought, like people counting something they understand. One of them lifts a handful of petals to her nose and the other laughs softly. The petals are for scenting oil, for steeping into syrups, for water served in small cups before sleep. The garden feeds the senses, and the senses feed the heart. I walk on, and the tiles change under my feet. Small squares set like a woven rug, then lozenges of green and white, then a border of black that reminds the eye to rest before beginning again. A mason once told me the ground can carry a person more kindly if it is given patterns that calm. I have found this true. My steps slow, and thoughts I do not need lift away like chaff in the breeze. At the far end of the courtyard, a low doorway leads to a kitchen garden. Here the vines are thicker, the soil darker, the scent of damp earth stronger. A boy has tied rushes around clusters of grapes to keep birds from eating them. He shows me one, tight green pearls that will finish their sweetness under the late sun. Beside us, a woman kneels at a bed of coriander, pulling a few stems for a midday stew. Her knife is small and bright. She keeps it in a cloth at her hip. She tells me, without looking up, that planting close to the water keeps the leaves tender. I thank her, and she nods toward a row of tall plants whose flowers are like pale clouds. Fennel. For breath, she says, tapping her chest lightly. And for good dreams. Heat gathers slowly. In the distance, a bell-like clack of wooden shutters opening along a gallery, then the low murmur of men exchanging greetings. The palace is awake. A scholar in a dark robe walks with a small boy at his side, instructing him with gentle questions. What shape does the shadow make at this hour? Where does the channel begin? If you divide the garden into 4, what is each part for? The boy points. Herbs, fruit, shade, and rest. The scholar smiles. Lessons hide in ordinary places. I pause beneath an orange tree. The leaves hold dew in their cupped hands, and the fruit glows like captured sunrise. I recall hearing that traders brought the bitter orange from far to the east, then gardeners coaxed it into our soil until it belonged. The world arrives here in quiet ways. A seed in a pocket, a story told at night, a pattern traced from memory onto wet plaster. When morning comes, we find ourselves living inside what was carried. A pair of doves settle on the rim of the pool, their pink feet careful on the stone. They lower their heads to drink, throats working in tiny pulses. The softer one tilts her head toward me. For a moment we share the shade, the water, the simple act of being quiet in a place meant for quiet. The sound of their wings when they lift away is like silk drawn gently across wood. Near the western wall, carpenters are fitting a cedar door into a new frame. The wood smells faintly of resin and clean wind. Each time the door slides into place, the master squints at the seam, adjusts the hinge, tries again. He nods once, almost to himself, when the door swings with no sound at all. We learn what good work is by feeling how it moves, the way a door keeps secrets, the way a gate admits light like a friend. A young man in a sleeveless vest carries a rolled carpet on his shoulder. Another follows with a low brass table. They set them beneath a trellis, woven with jasmine and vine, a square of shade made sweet by the blossoms. People will sit here later when the heat pushes us towards softness. Cups of sherbet sweating cold on the brass, a plate of almonds and dates resting between friends. Conversation will unfurl like a shawl. There will be pauses. Someone will quote a verse, then another will answer with a line of their own. Words are not knives here, they are gardens planted where a person can walk without tripping. A distant voice calls the gardeners to pause. A man in a pale robe stands with a leather tube slung across his shoulder. He tilts it. A thread of water slides into one of the narrow channels and the course changes, a new bed fed, another allowed to dry. We cannot water everything at once, he says. He speaks the rules in a voice that is not stern, only sure. Mornings for the beds nearest the wall, afternoons for the far rows. Never flood at midday when the sun is ablade. The men nod. In a place like this, wisdom is not a secret, it is a schedule. Balance keeps beauty alive. A procession of small things continues, and each teaches gently. A seamstress crouches to brush dust from a tiled threshold with the edge of her sleeve. The tile returns more color than I remember it having. A boy bends to pick up a fallen pomegranate flower. It stains his finger the color of promise. A cat glides from shade to shade, choosing stones still cool enough to please her paws. We follow creatures who know how to rest. I walk into a narrower passage, the kind of place that keeps noon at a distance. The air is cooler here, carrying the scent of damp stone and crushed jasmine from the steps of those who went before me. The passage opens onto a small courtyard with a square pool and 4 channels entering it from the corners. The layout is deliberate, and even those who do not speak of such things can feel the calm that arrives when a space answers itself. 4 paths, 4 rivulets, 4 beds. A balance a person can walk into and wear like a garment. An elderly woman sits with a basket of linen on her lap. She mends with small, neat stitches, breaking thread with her teeth and smoothing the seam with a thumb. I greet her, and she asks if the morning has been kind. I say it has, and her eyes move to the pool. It is kinder, she murmurs, if we sit near water before the day grows wise. I smile because I know what she means. The mind that meets water early walks more softly across the hours that follow. A courtyard guard passes with a spear that has never harmed anyone. Its presence is the keeping of the gate, not its breaking. He greets the scribe with a nod, tips his chin toward the carpenters, and pauses to let a pair of servants carry a tray between them. Copper cups nesting like warm coins, a clay jug cooling in a shallow bowl of water. When he moves on, his sandals make a sound I have grown to love, a respectful whisper against stone. I turn toward the long rill that runs like a silver thread through the next garden. The channel is lined with tiles the green of pressed leaves. Water glides, not gushes, when it meets a small stone placed deliberately in its path. It divides without complaint, then returns to itself. Sometimes watching it tells me everything I need to know about how to live with others, how to go around without giving up, how to join again without pride. A cluster of students sit cross-legged in the shade, their teacher drawing figures on a board with chalk that scratches just enough to be heard. Circles become astronomy. Rectangles become the design of a room. A length of cord stretched taut becomes a lesson in how a wall stays true against the pull of time. The boys lean forward, foreheads shining in the new heat. One raises his hand to ask about the way stars move when we are not looking. The teacher lifts his eyes to the sky as if to listen. If the heavens are a text, we are all learning to read. I stop in the doorway of a small room where a calligrapher has hung pages to dry. Each sheet holds a verse and a different quiet. One reads like a river, another like a window open to wind. The ink smells faintly metallic like rain touching iron. He waves me in with an ink-stained hand, and I stand without speaking, because sometimes our breath is the only thanks we must give. He points to a single word repeated in a border. Mercy. The letters cradle each other so tenderly, I feel my shoulders lower just to look at them. When I step back into the courtyard, the morning has advanced. Light pools on the tiles in brighter patches, and the cypress throws shorter shadows. A pair of kitchen boys hurry past with a tray of cucumbers, their laughter bouncing off the walls like sparrows. From the farthest arch, a woman sets a jug of water on the threshold and fans her face with a palm leaf, then pauses to listen to the fountain as if it will answer a question she has not asked aloud. I rest under the trellis and watch a bee circle a cluster of jasmine. The blossoms open without sound, and yet I hear them, not with the ear, but in the way the breath becomes more generous nearby. The garden was meant to be like this, they say, a picture a person could walk into, a room whose ceiling is sky. In such places, love is not a story told loudly. It is made of small acts, straightening a cushion, shifting a channel, placing a cup where a tired hand can find it. A soft bell rings from somewhere beyond the wall. The hour marks itself, then disappears. I rise and smooth my robe. There are arches still to pass under, and a long pool where the morning will fold itself into light. The jasmine reminds me, with its calm insistence, that we have time enough to notice, and in noticing, to rest. Walk with me. The day is opening. The water knows where to go. And here in this garden, we can let the hours arrange themselves around us like shade. Chapter 2. Water, the heart of paradise. The first sound of the garden is always water. Even before footsteps, before voices, it is the fountains and the channels that wake. This morning I follow the silver thread that runs through the courtyard. The water slipping over green-tiled edges, gliding without hurry. The air is cool here, cooler than the streets beyond the wall, because the channels carry the mountain with them, snowmelt from the Sierra Nevada, drawn down through aqueducts, bent and coaxed into quiet rhythm by the hands of men who understood that paradise needs water more than gold. I pause at a narrow channel and watch a gardener dip his hand into the current, scattering drops across the soil where rows of herbs grow. Mint, basil, fennel, their leaves tremble as though grateful. He lifts his head and nods, his face sun-darkened, his sleeves rolled high. A small clay jug rests by his feet, filled again and again by the stream. The water is not wasted here. It is measured, guided, spoken to. The palace itself is a hymn to water. Pools mirror the sky, fountains sing their even tones, and rills divide the courtyards like veins, carrying life. Some say the prophet promised that rivers flow in paradise. Here the rulers of Granada have carved that promise into stone, so that the soul can believe with its eyes as well as its heart. I lean closer to the channel, hearing the difference between each stream. One soft and low, another brighter, almost playful, depending on how the stone has been cut. A mason crouches nearby, adjusting a small piece of clay set into the course. He moves it just a finger's breadth, and the note changes. The sound becomes more calm, less restless. He glances at me and smiles. "The water teaches," he says. We only listen. Beyond him, children chase each other along the tiled edges of the pool, their sandals tapping like drums. Their laughter blends with the fountains, so that the air carries both rest and delight. A boy slips and steadies himself, the splash catching his face, and he laughs harder. His mother calls softly, not in anger, but in reminder. Water is joy, but also trust. I walk further and see a great reflecting pool stretched long between arches. Cypress trees stand guard along its edges, their dark green mirrored so perfectly that for a moment I cannot tell where earth ends and water begins. A scholar leans over the pool with a student, pointing to the reflection of the sky. He traces a line with his finger, saying, "The heavens can be read in water as well as in books." The boy watches, his eyes wide, as if the pool holds the stars even in daylight. I kneel at the pool's edge, letting my robe brush the marble. My reflection wavers, bends, and then steadies. I drop a single petal of jasmine into the water, and the ripples scatter the image into soft fragments, reminding me that nothing need be held too tightly to remain true. The gardeners say the channels run like poetry, measured lines, pauses, turns, each one carrying meaning. And like poetry, it comes from far away, yet belongs to us the moment it is spoken. The aqueducts that bring this water are older than I can say, carved into the mountainsides, carrying the cold of snowfields down into the heat of the city. Without them, no orange trees would grow, no vines would blossom, no marble walls would be cooled. The water is not just a gift. It is the promise of survival. A boy passes carrying a goatskin bag slung across his shoulder. He stoops to refill it at the fountain, careful not to spill a drop. The bag is heavy by the time he lifts it, but he does not complain. He knows, as all of us know, that to waste water is to waste breath itself. Even in this garden of abundance, gratitude runs with every stream. I step into another courtyard where the sound deepens, a great fountain at its center, its jet rising high and falling back in crystal spray. Children gather near, holding out their hands to catch droplets, their giggles rising like birds startled into flight. The fountain is more than beauty. It cools the air, it moistens the earth, it reminds us that life must circulate. I think of the words carved in Arabic script along the marble edge. Only those who are pure in heart may drink of the fountain of paradise. The letters gleam faintly where the spray has darkened the stone. Near the fountain, a man kneels with a copper bowl. He dips it gently, watching as the water fills without breaking the surface. When it is full, he raises it to his lips and drinks. I hear the soft sigh he makes after, as if the water itself had spoken peace into his body. He notices me and says, "It is sweeter than honey, for it holds no weight upon the tongue." I nod because I know he is right. Water is the only drink that makes the heart feel lighter when it enters. I walk along the rill again, the water cutting a line straight through the courtyard. Along its sides, tiles glow emerald and turquoise, their colors brightened by the wetness. A woman washes pomegranates there, the red skins gleaming as the water runs over them. She sets them in a basket, the drops clinging like jewels. I remember that the Prophet himself praised the pomegranate as a fruit of paradise, and I wonder if the seeds carry with them a piece of eternity, scattered into our mortal hands. Not far away, an old man with a long beard sits by another channel, his eyes closed, his lips moving silently. He dips his fingers again and again into the stream, touching them to his forehead, his chest, his shoulders, ablution before prayer. Water cleanses not only the body but the space between thought and thought. When he finally rises, his face is softened, not by the water itself, but by the surrender he gave it. I follow the stream to where it divides again. one branch curving left, the other right. Two boys stand here with small clay dams guiding the water for play. They laugh as they divert the stream toward each other's feet, then work together to restore it. They do not realize they are practicing the art of irrigation, the same art that keeps the gardens alive. Games teach us before we even know we are learning. I sit under the shade of a fig tree. Its broad leaves cast a cool shadow, and the water nearby whispers against stone. From here I see a tiled alcove, a small fountain set into the wall. Above it an inscription reads, "He who drinks of me will remember God." The water trickles slow and steady, enough to fill a small basin, enough to invite any passerby to pause. I watch as a servant girl kneels, fills a cup, and carries it to her mistress. The older woman drinks and then smiles, setting the empty cup on the stone ledge. No words pass between them. The act itself is language. The deeper I walk into the garden, the more I notice how the water orders everything. Paths are aligned with channels, beds of flowers shaped by its direction. Even the trees lean toward it. The builders knew this, that the garden would be alive only if the water was alive. And so they shaped not just stone and soil, but silence and sound. The channels are music, and the garden is its instrument. As I sit beside another pool, the breeze carries the scent of jasmine and orange blossom across the water. A bird swoops down, skims the surface, and lifts away again, leaving rings that widen and fade. For a moment the pool holds the memory of wings, then it forgets, returning to stillness. Watching it, I feel my breath slow, as though the water is teaching me again. Everything passes, everything rests. A pair of stonemasons arrive with a cart, the wheels creaking softly over the tiles. They lift two narrow slabs of marble and tilt them into place over a section of open channel, leaving thin slits for the water to breathe. One of them kneels, ear close to the seam, listening not for leaks, but for tone. The other shaves the edge with a chisel, and the sound of water deepens, like a lute string tuned a fraction closer to truth. They exchange a look that needs no words. Work that honors water honors the one who drinks. Across the way, the irrigation master lays out his reed markers. He sets them at intervals along the channel so each gardener knows when to open and when to close. His tablet carries the rota in tidy columns. Plots near the cypress in the cool of morning, citrus at mid-afternoon, roses at sundown. No one argues with the schedule. Here fairness is measured in time and flow. He notices me watching and taps the nearest marker with a fingertip. "Justice," he says, "must be visible or it will dry like an untended bed." He smiles at the small joke and moves on. I follow a rill through a low arch and into a quieter court, where the water runs in 4 equal arms toward a square basin. The design is simple, but the effect is certain. The space steadies the mind. A young mother sits with her infant on her knees, dipping a cloth in the pool and pressing it to the child's brow. The baby sighs, soothed by coolness and the fountain's lullaby. When she looks up, her eyes are clear with thanks. No one asked her to speak aloud. From the shade, an older scholar traces lines on a wax tablet. He measures the length of the shadow falling from the column, muttering figures that turn air into proof. He murmurs of hours and seasons, of the way the sun bends differently over mountains than over the sea. Water makes his thought visible. In the reflection, he sees the sky he cannot touch, and so the day becomes a lesson the hand can hold. Beyond him, a pair of boys kneel with tiny wooden wheels they have carved themselves, launching them along the lip of the channel and racing them to the basin. The current kisses the wheels and sets them spinning. The boys cheer, faces lifted to the splash. Between their shouts I hear again what the mason said, "The water teaches." In play, a truth becomes a friend, A servant brings out 2 shallow copper trays and sets them on the stone, one empty, one piled with wet linen. She pours water over the cloth and wrings it with slow strength, her movements the same every day, a ritual of keeping cool those who will work in the hottest hours. A breeze slides through the court, lifting the damp fragrance of clean cloth and plaster. Drops fall from her hands like small, bright coins. Each sound is a note. At the far edge, a slender spout throws a narrow arc into the basin. A gardener slips a sprig of rosemary into the jet for a moment, and then tucks the dripping leaves behind his ear. He says it keeps his thoughts clear. I believe him. The scent rises and the mind walks straighter paths. When he sees me noticing, he offers a sprig. Water purls along its edge as if the plant remembers the mountain it once was. The channels lead me to a long court, white with noon. Here the rill is shaded by latticed cedar, the pattern tossing small islands of shadow that drift across the water like prayer beads, sliding through a careful hand. The lattice cools the air without denying the light. Above it, swallows stitch the sky with dark thread. Below, the water carries their fleeting shapes, breaks them, remakes them, and lets them pass. At the head of the court stands a small room, just deep enough for a bench and a niche. I enter and sit. A clay jar rests in a bowl of water to keep it cool. I lift the stopper and scent the slightest trace of mint. In the niche, a shallow shell is carved into stone, lines radiating outward. When I pour a cup and drink, the world steps back 2 paces and waits. Thirst is a veil. Water is the hand that lifts it. I return to the light and find the musicians beginning to gather along a shaded walk. A kanun rests on a lap, its strings hummed softly, more testing than song. A ney offers a low breath, and the sound folds into the water's voice until I cannot say which began first. A drummer lays his palm to the skin and lifts it, as if asking permission. When the rhythm comes, it comes like the channels, gentle, deliberate, sure. One of them nods toward the rill. We tuned to that, he says. It keeps us honest. Past the musicians, the rose garden spills color along a bank, pale, deep, and in between. A woman with stained fingers tips a clay cup and splashes rose water onto a flagstone, wiping it with a cloth until the stone reveals its hidden blue. There are, in this place, colors the midday hides. Water persuades them to speak. I step into a passage where the water runs beneath the floor, a whisper below the tiles. The sound is a promise. Even when you cannot see me, I am working. The cool under my sandals is proof. Outside, a boy stretches on tiptoe to hook a small bronze ladle over a spout. He sips, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and grins at no one. By a citrus grove, a gardener kneels to open the clay plug that closes an underground cistern. A silver band of water shows in the dark like a secret kept well. He checks the level, counts slow, and closes it again. For later, he says when he notices me. Water is a story told across days. He pats the ground as if to reassure it. A breeze carries the smell of wet stone and orange blossom. I lean over a narrow chute where water falls no more than a hand's height into a hidden bed of pebbles. The fall is shallow by design. The voice it makes is small, clear, and continuous, the sound of year after year learning the same calm lesson. Large waterfalls can dazzle a crowd. This little fall convinces a single pulse. I realize my breathing matches it. Not far from the chute, a tiled plaque lists the rules of the channels, painted in indigo and green. Open only as much as you need. Return the flow when your bed is satisfied. Watch the temperature. Spare the roots when the sun holds a knife. Repair what you move. Leave what you borrow the way you found it. I read them once, and again more slowly. The garden is a teacher who never raises its voice. By the olive trees, 2 elders sit with their sandals off, soles pressed to the cool coping of the pool, while a grandson counts the fish beneath the surface. The elders speak of harvests, of good years and lean, of how the channels used to run before the new sluices were cut. The boy interrupts to announce the fish have become too clever to count. One of the men laughs and says wisdom is a kind of hiding. The other replies that water is wiser for being seen. As the day turns, the schedule turns with it. The irrigation master returns, his reeds in hand, and nods to a young man at a junction. The plug is lifted, a side bed fills, soil drinking with a sound too soft to name. Farther on, another plug is lowered. The long rill deepens by a finger's width, and the reflection darkens as if the sky leaned closer. People adapt around the change without pause, the same music in a new key. I pass under arches where vines cast leafy nets across the light. Bees visit the pools to collect what they need. They return as steadily as pilgrims. At a small basin, a woman tips a copper pitcher and lets the stream wash over pitted lemons. She presses one gently, inhales, and closes her eyes. The water brightens everything it touches. At last I return to the first court where morning began, and I sit at the edge of the fountain that taught me its tone. The old man who adjusted the brass spout earlier is there again, not working now, only resting with both hands on his knees. He nods toward the stream. "Do you hear it?" he asks. I listen. The note is round, even, patient. "It will carry you," he says. "Just let your breath step where the water steps." He closes his eyes, and I follow. For a time there is nothing to do but breathe with the fountain. In and out. The mind loosens its grip the way a channel loosens around a stone. Birds cross the court in fragments of shadow. Somewhere, a shutter opens, a soft clap like gentle hands finding each other. The air warms, then cools, as a breeze moves through jasmine. The water continues, faithful to its path. When I finally rise, I touch the marble with my fingertips, as if to thank it for holding the river still enough for the sky to visit. I move slowly along the rill, feeling the day unfold along the same line. The channels have their appointments. This bed now, that tree later. The pool will receive, the spout will give. I realize the garden has written its rhythm into me. I am less a visitor than a vessel. At the final arch, I look back. Light lies in long bands across the tiles. The cypress stand like green pens writing silence into air. The water gathers itself and moves on, not in a rush, not in defiance, simply as it must. I breathe and follow. Come, there is more to see and more to rest inside. The sun will soften toward evening, and the garden will change its voice. For now, let the water finish its sentence, and let your body read it without hurrying. Walk with me and listen. Chapter 3. The Builder's Legacy. The noon light rests heavier now, though the garden softens it with shade and water. I walk slowly toward the northern side, where the walls rise higher, their surfaces painted with delicate plasterwork. Each curve and pattern was laid by men whose names most will never know. Yet their hands speak still, carved into every line. It is said that the dynasty of the Nasrids built these palaces over the span of a century, from the middle of the 13th to this very 14th. When Muhammad I chose this hill above Granada, he chose a throne not of gold but of stone and water. His descendants continued the work, adding halls, courts, gardens, each ruler leaving behind another layer of paradise. I pause beneath an arch where the stucco is fine as lace. Geometric stars fold into one another, lines so precise they seem drawn by instruments of heaven. A mason's apprentice once showed me how these patterns begin with a single circle, from one, another, then 4, then 8, until the wall becomes an endless net of harmony. Boring, some would say, only numbers and lines, yet to stand beneath them is to feel order woven into the bones of the air, A boy runs past me with a scroll under his arm, bound with a strip of leather. He belongs to one of the scribes. His master sits nearby, in the shade, copying from an older book. He dips his reed pen into black ink, steady hand-marking letters that curve and balance like the arches above. The book he copies speaks of governance, laws written during the time of Muhammad V. Here in the gardens, knowledge is tended as carefully as roses. The rulers commanded not only fountains and courtyards, but also schools, libraries, baths, and courts of justice. I turn toward a long wall where Arabic verses are carved into the plaster. The script winds along the surface like water made into words. They praise God, they honor the ruler, they speak of paradise. One line says, "There is no conqueror but God." That phrase is repeated everywhere in these palaces. A visitor could mistake it for decoration, but it is more than beauty. It is a declaration. The rulers knew their power was fragile, surrounded by kingdoms that rose and fell. These words anchored their reign in something greater than armies. Near the fountain, a group of young men gather with tools, chisels, hammers, small brushes. They are repairing a frieze that time and weather have worn. Dust rises from the plaster as they carve back the old design, their movements slow, reverent. One leans close, blowing gently into a corner, and the pattern emerges as though waking from sleep. This is not new work, but the keeping alive of memory. Without it, the palace would crumble into silence. I rest on a bench of cedar, the wood cool, faintly scented with resin. A man beside me speaks softly, telling his son of the sultans who once walked these paths. He names Yusuf I, who brought architects from across the Maghreb to shape the Hall of Justice. He names Muhammad V, who saw the construction of the great court of the lions with its marble fountain borne by 12 carved beasts. These rulers sought not only to rule but to leave behind a vision of paradise on earth, so that even centuries hence we would walk here and remember. The boy listening to his father yawns, and I smile. The names of rulers and dates may sound dull to young ears, but I know one day he will return and find those facts waiting for him in the stone, steady as the water's voice. Beyond the bench, the calligrapher I saw earlier lifts a page to dry. He explains to a young student that letters are more than sound. They are geometry of the spirit. He says that the curve of a line, the balance of a word, carries the same discipline as the measuring of water in the channels. Both require patience, both shape the soul. His student nods, perhaps not yet understanding, but already the lesson has entered him. I walk toward a courtyard where tiles glitter with deep blue and green. The technique came from artisans who learned it in Persia and carried it westward through trade. Glaze, they say, was a miracle of fire, clay baked until it holds the color of sky. A craftsman polishes the tiles with a cloth, each square reflecting a fragment of the sun. He hums as he works, and I hear in his song the echo of long journeys. For nothing in this garden belongs to Granada alone. Every color, every motif was gathered from across the world, from Damascus, from Cairo, from Cordoba, from Seville. The garden is a tapestry of lands and hands. I lean against a column and watch as he demonstrates the tile work to a curious visitor. He explains how each tile must fit not only in size but in spirit, how a single misplaced angle can break the entire pattern. He holds up a fragment and points to the glaze, cobalt from far to the east, copper for green, manganese for purple. His knowledge is plain, spoken without ceremony, yet I feel as though I am overhearing a secret of the earth itself. The walls here hold muqarnas, the honeycomb vaulting that catches light and scatters it like thousands of small stars. I tilt my head back and feel dizzy at the thought that stone can imitate the heavens. Men who shaped such vaults worked for years, perched on scaffolds, carving and setting each tiny cell. Their patience remains in the air. Even now, centuries later, I feel it pressing gently into my shoulders. A child tugs at his mother's sleeve, pointing upward. "Are they beehives?" he asks. She shakes her head with a smile. "They are the heavens brought low," she answers. The boy frowns, then nods, satisfied with a mystery he cannot yet solve. In the corner of the courtyard, I find a marble plaque recording the names of those who funded this portion of the palace. Merchants, generals, ministers. Their wealth was turned into arches, fountains, gardens. I wonder if they knew that one day their names would be forgotten by most, while the water and stone remained. Perhaps they did. Perhaps that was the point. I move along a shaded arcade where workmen polish columns with cloths dipped in oil. Their hands leave faint sheen on the marble, catching the sun where it filters through the lattice. One tells me that each column must be cared for as one would care for a horse, brushed, tended, kept alive through touch. Without such attention, even stone grows weary. Farther along, I overhear a scholar reciting a chronicle of the dynasty to a group of boys. He speaks of Muhammad I, who first raised these walls in the year 1238. He tells of Yusuf I, who expanded the palaces, and of his son Muhammad V, under whose reign the Court of the Lions was born. The boys listen, some with eyes bright, others distracted, tracing lines in the dust with their toes. The scholar does not mind. He knows that seeds sown in dullness may bloom later in memory. At a nearby pool, an older woman rinses figs in the water, her voice carrying as she tells another woman that the sultans often invited poets to walk here. Poets, she says, were as valued as generals, for they shaped not armies but remembrance. She quotes a verse carved on a nearby wall. "I am a garden adorned by beauty. Gaze at my perfection, and you will see an art that time cannot erase." I touch the stone where the words are carved. The letters feel cool, their grooves still sharp, though the century has turned many times. Poetry, like water, outlives the hand that gives it shape. As I walk, I see a small group of architects huddled over a drawing board. They argue gently over measurements, tracing lines with charcoal, comparing them to the columns before them. They are designing a new hall, perhaps, or restoring an old one. One leans back and says, "The Sultan wants the arch to sing when light passes through it." The others nod, as if such a request were no stranger than asking for water to flow. Here, beauty is not ornament. It is duty. I pause by another fountain, its basin shaped like a star. The water gathers in its center and flows outward into 8 channels, each feeding a corner of the courtyard. A young man sits at the edge, his hand trailing in the water. He murmurs that the design is no accident. It reflects the gardens of paradise described in the Quran, with rivers flowing outward in 4 directions. Here, the builders made theology into stone, scripture into fountain. A group of travelers from the Maghreb pass through, marveling at the plasterwork. One says he has seen the mosques of Fez, another boasts of Cairo's great halls, yet both fall silent as they step under the arch, their words caught by the beauty above them. In that silence, I hear history speaking louder than their pride. I walk to a quieter corner where the walls are plain, awaiting decoration. A plasterer works steadily, spreading the wet mixture with a trowel, smoothing it until it shines. He explains to his apprentice that the wall must breathe. Too much plaster, and it will crack. Too little, and it will crumble. His voice is patient, even dull, but the truth in it is as firm as the wall itself. From here, the sound of chisels drifts across the courtyard. I follow it and find men shaping stone for columns. Dust coats their robes and their hands are rough, yet their eyes are steady, fixed on the line they carve. One tells me that the stone was brought from the quarries of Elvira, north of the city. Each block carried on carts pulled by oxen, each journey slow, dangerous. We measure not only stone, he says, but also patience. His words are plain, yet I feel them settle inside me like a lesson. The sun leans westward now, and the shadows stretch long across the tiles. I stop beneath a cypress and look back at the halls and arches. The air still hums with the work of many hands. Masons, scribes, scholars, gardeners, poets. Their names blur, their faces fade, but their presence lingers in every arch, every petal, every drop of water. The jasmine leans across the wall, its blossoms pale against the carved script. The garden reminds me that history is not only kings and battles. It is also the patient hand that carves, the steady foot that carries water, the quiet voice that teaches a child. All of them are here, written into the silence, into the flow, into the air that carries both perfume and dust. So let us walk on, and as we do, remember that even in the smallest arch, the dullest fact, the faintest carving, history waits to be seen. For it is not boring, not truly. It is simply the memory of those who walked before us, kept alive by stone, water, and time. Chapter 4. The Voices of Knowledge. The air is softer now, though the sun is high. A quiet breeze has entered the garden, threading through the cypress and across the water. I follow it toward a shaded arcade, where the walls hold patterns that echo the very order of the world. It is here, in this stretch of the palace, that knowledge itself seems to gather, not in books alone, but in voices, in gestures, in stone. A group of men sit cross-legged on woven mats, gathered in a semicircle around a scholar. His beard is long, streaked with white, and his robe is ink-stained from hours bent over manuscripts. In his hand he holds a small book of astronomy, copied from the works of earlier masters. The students lean forward as he explains the movement of stars. He lifts a brass astrolabe, holding it up so that the sun glints along its edges. From this, he says, we read not only the heavens, but also the seasons, the times of planting, the hours of prayer. The boys murmur, tracing lines in the dust with their fingers, as if trying to follow the constellations themselves. Some grow restless, shifting on their mats, but the scholar does not scold. He knows that even half-heard words may take root later, when the mind is ready. These lessons are part of the garden itself, planted, watered, patient. I step closer and look over the shoulders of the students. The brass disc is etched with circles, degrees, and star names, some in Arabic, some older, Greek, carried across centuries by scholars who refuse to let knowledge die. In Cordoba, in Toledo, in Seville, such texts were translated and preserved, while elsewhere in Europe books had burned or been forgotten. It is dull, perhaps, to speak of translations and treatises, of tables and diagrams, yet without them, the world would be blind to its own sky. I move on, the sound of the lecture fading into the garden's hum. Nearby, under another arch, a physician sits with a group of apprentices. On the ground before them lies a tray of herbs, mint, coriander, fennel, hyssop. The physician holds up a sprig of rue, explaining its bitterness and its uses for fevers. He crushes a leaf, passing it to the boys to smell. Each plant, he says, is a word of God's language. Learn the grammar, and you may heal without steel. One of the apprentices scribbles notes onto a wax tablet, his stylus scratching like an insect. Another yawns, bored by the lecture, while a third chews thoughtfully on the end of his reed pen. The physician continues unhurried, his voice calm. He speaks of Ibn al-Baitar, the great botanist of Malaga, who catalogued more than 1,000 plants and their remedies. His name may not quicken the heart, but his work feeds the body of those who never knew him. This too is history, the slow patience of men who gathered leaves, roots, seeds, and knowledge, weaving them into the survival of others. The air grows warm, and I pause in a cool alcove where water runs in a narrow channel beneath a carved lattice. The sound is low, like breath whispered between words. On the wall above, verses are carved in Kufic script. Seek knowledge, even as far as China. The letters gleam faintly, painted once in blue and gold. I think of the travelers who came here, merchants from the Maghreb, scholars from Damascus, envoys from far to the east. Each carried something in their saddlebags, not only goods, but ideas. From the corner, I hear the murmur of another voice. A mathematician sits with a tablet of sand before him, drawing lines and figures. A small group of children gather around, half curious, half distracted. He explains how numbers shape the arches above their heads, how geometry binds the patterns on the tiles. He draws a circle, then divides it into 4, then into 8. He places a tile against the drawing, showing how the design is born from the circle's womb. The children frown, trying to follow, but the mathematician only smiles. It is not necessary to understand all at once, he says. It is enough to see the pattern is there. He speaks of Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, whose works traveled from Baghdad to Andalusia. He speaks of how numbers can predict eclipses, calculate taxes, design fountains, measure time. These things may seem tedious, sums, formulas, calculations, but without them, there would be no garden such as this, no arches that hold, no water that flows evenly. The dullness of numbers is what allows beauty to exist. I walk slowly, my sandals whispering on the tiles. The path leads me to a long hall, cool and dim, where books are stored in wooden chests. A librarian tends to them, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes weary from reading by lamplight. He shows me a manuscript copied from Aristotle, another from Galen, both carried across centuries through the hands of translators and commentators. He explains how scholars of Al-Andalus translated Greek into Arabic, then Latin, so that Europe itself might one day awaken to learning again. The librarian sighs, stroking the worn leather of a binding. Books do not last forever, he says, but ideas can travel, if carried carefully. He gestures to a boy carrying a fresh sheet of parchment. The boy will spend hours copying lines of text, his wrist aching, his mind wandering. And yet, that dull, patient work is what keeps knowledge alive. Without such copying, the voices of the past would vanish like smoke. Outside the hall, I find a small gathering of poets. They sit on cushions beneath a fig tree, reciting verses to one another. Their words are soft, drifting with the breeze. One recites a qasida praising the Sultan. Another speaks of love, of longing, of the jasmine blossoms that open at night. Poetry is not merely ornament here. It is a record, a mirror, a way of inscribing the heart of the people. I recall that Muhammad V himself was a patron of poets, inviting them to inscribe their words into the very walls of the palace. Thus, the walls themselves speak not only of rulers and of God, but of the quiet pulse of human longing. A child nearby repeats one of the verses, stumbling over the words. His father laughs softly, correcting him. The boy frowns, then recites again, this time smoother. Poetry, like water, shapes itself around the tongue. One day the boy will forget this afternoon, but the verse will remain, surfacing years later when the scent of jasmine carries him back. I sit for a time by a small fountain, its spout shaped like a lion's head, the water flowing from its mouth into a shallow basin. The fountain was carved decades ago, during Yusuf I's reign, when artisans experimented with new forms and designs. The lion itself is stylized, more symbol than beast, but it speaks of strength, of guardianship. I trail my fingers in the water, feeling how history flows not in sudden torrents but in slow, continuous streams. Nearby, a young scribe dips his pen into ink, writing down the events of the day. He records the hours of prayer, the arrival of envoys, the deliveries of grain. His words are plain, even tedious, but they are the backbone of memory. Without such records, centuries collapse into rumor. He glances up at me, his eyes tired, and then returns to his task. He does not know that his small notes may one day help someone understand how we lived, how we watered the gardens, how we prayed, how we ate. The sun shifts westward, light angling through the lattice in narrow beams. Dust motes dance like tiny stars. I wander into another courtyard, where a teacher instructs a group of girls. Their mothers sit nearby, listening as he recites passages from the Quran. The girls repeat, their voices hesitant, then stronger. Their eyes are bright, their hands folded in their laps. One of them stumbles over a word and blushes. The teacher smiles gently. "Patience," he says. Even the river took time to carve the mountain. It is easy to forget, when walking through arches and hearing fountains, that learning was the foundation of this place. Not only beauty, not only pleasure, but knowledge, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, poetry, scripture. Each subject has its place in the garden, as each channel has its bed. It may seem dull to some, dates, names, titles, lists, yet together they form the bones of history, hidden beneath the fragrance of jasmine and the sparkle of water. I pass a stone bench where an elder sits, his hands folded on a cane. He speaks to no one, only watching the students as they recite, the scribes as they write, the craftsmen as they polish. His gaze is calm, patient. Perhaps he remembers when he too was a student in these halls, when he first heard the name of Aristotle, when he first learned how the stars move. Now he simply watches, content that knowledge is carried forward, even if imperfectly. As I leave the arcade, the garden opens before me again. The jasmine leans across the walls, blossoms white against the red plaster. The water glides through its channels, faithful as ever. I realize that history is not only in the rulers who built these palaces, but in the dull, patient labor of those who taught, copied, recited, measured, healed. Their voices may not carry through time as loudly as the clash of swords, but without them there would be nothing left to walk through. I pause at the fountain once more, listening to its steady voice. Then I whisper almost to myself, "Knowledge is water. It flows, it nourishes, it survives." The breeze stirs, carrying the scent of mint and stone. I rise and I walk on. Chapter 4, The Voices of Knowledge. The air is softer now, though the sun is high. A quiet breeze has entered the garden, threading through the cypress and across the water. I follow it toward a shaded arcade, where the walls hold patterns that echo the very order of the world. It is here, in this stretch of the palace, that knowledge itself seems to gather, not in books alone, but in voices, in gestures, in stone. A group of men sit cross-legged on woven mats, gathered in a semicircle around a scholar. His beard is long, streaked with white, and his robe is ink-stained from hours bent over manuscripts. In his hand, he holds a small book of astronomy, copied from the works of earlier masters. The students lean forward as he explains the movement of stars. He lifts a brass astrolabe, holding it up so that the sun glints along its edges. "From this," he says, "we read not only the heavens, but also the seasons, the times of planting, the hours of prayer." The boys murmur, tracing lines in the dust with their fingers as if trying to follow the constellations themselves. Some grow restless, shifting on their mats, but the scholar does not scold. He knows that even half-heard words may take root later when the mind is ready. These lessons are part of the garden itself, planted, watered, patient. I step closer and look over the shoulders of the students. The brass disc is etched with circles, degrees, and star names, some in Arabic, some older Greek, carried across centuries by scholars who refused to let knowledge die. In Córdoba, in Toledo, in Seville, such texts were translated and preserved, while elsewhere in Europe books had burned or been forgotten. It is dull, perhaps, to speak of translations and treatises, of tables and diagrams. Yet without them, the world would be blind to its own sky. I move on, the sound of the lecture fading into the garden's hum. Nearby, under another arch, a physician sits with a group of apprentices. On the ground before them lies a tray of herbs: mint, coriander, fennel, hyssop. The physician holds up a sprig of rue, explaining its bitterness and its uses for fevers. He crushes a leaf, passing it to the boys to smell. Each plant, he says, is a word of God's language. Learn the grammar and you may heal without steel. One of the apprentices scribbles notes onto a wax tablet, his stylus scratching like an insect. Another yawns, bored by the lecture, while a third chews thoughtfully on the end of his reed pen. The physician continues unhurried, his voice calm. He speaks of Ibn al-Baitar, the great botanist of Malaga, who catalogued more than 1,000 plants and their remedies. His name may not quicken the heart, but his work feeds the body of those who never knew him. This too is history. The slow patience of men who gathered leaves, roots, seeds, and knowledge, weaving them into the survival of others. The air grows warm, and I pause in a cool alcove where water runs in a narrow channel beneath a carved lattice. The sound is low, like breath whispered between words. On the wall above, verses are carved in Kufic script. Seek knowledge, even as far as China. The letters gleam faintly, painted once in blue and gold. I think of the travelers who came here, merchants from the Maghreb, scholars from Damascus, envoys from far to the east. Each carried something in their saddlebags, not only goods, but ideas. From the corner I hear the murmur of another voice. A mathematician sits with a tablet of sand before him, drawing lines and figures. A small group of children gather around, half curious, half distracted. He explains how numbers shape the arches above their heads, how geometry binds the patterns on the tiles. He draws a circle, then divides it into 4, then into 8. He places a tile against the drawing, showing how the design is born from the circle's womb. The children frown, trying to follow, but the mathematician only smiles. It is not necessary to understand all at once, he says. It is enough to see the pattern is there. He speaks of Al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, whose works traveled from Baghdad to Andalusia. He speaks of how numbers can predict eclipses, calculate taxes, design fountains, measure time. These things may seem tedious, sums, formulas, calculations, but without them, there would be no gardens such as this, no arches that hold, no water that flows evenly. The dullness of numbers is what allows beauty to exist. I walk slowly, my sandals whispering on the tiles. The path leads me to a long hall, cool and dim, where books are stored in wooden chests. A librarian tends to them, his fingers stained with ink, his eyes weary from reading by lamplight. He shows me a manuscript copied from Aristotle, another from Galen, both carried across centuries through the hands of translators and commentators. He explains how scholars of Al-Andalus translated Greek into Arabic, then Latin, so that Europe itself might one day awaken to learning again. The librarian sighs, stroking the worn leather of a binding. Books do not last forever, he says, but ideas can travel, if carried carefully. He gestures to a boy carrying a fresh sheet of parchment. The boy will spend hours copying lines of text, his wrist aching, his mind wandering, and yet that dull, patient work is what keeps knowledge alive. Without such copying, the voices of the past would vanish like smoke. Outside the hall, I find a small gathering of poets. They sit on cushions beneath a fig tree, reciting verses to one another. Their words are soft, drifting with the breeze. One recites a qasida praising the Sultan. Another speaks of love, of longing, of the jasmine blossoms that open at night. Poetry is not merely ornament here. It is a record, a mirror, a way of inscribing the heart of the people. I recall that Muhammad V himself was a patron of poets, inviting them to inscribe their words into the very walls of the palace. Thus, the walls themselves speak, not only of rulers and of God, but of the quiet pulse of human longing. A child nearby repeats one of the verses, stumbling over the words. His father laughs softly, correcting him. The boy frowns, then recites again, this time smoother. Poetry, like water, shapes itself around the tongue. One day the boy will forget this afternoon, but the verse will remain, surfacing years later when the scent of jasmine carries him back. I sit for a time by a small fountain, its spout shaped like a lion's head, the water flowing from its mouth into a shallow basin. The fountain was carved decades ago during Yusuf I's reign, when artisans experimented with new forms and designs. The lion itself is stylized, more symbol than beast, but it speaks of strength, of guardianship. I trail my fingers in the water, feeling how history flows not in sudden torrents, but in slow, continuous streams. Nearby, a young scribe dips his pen into ink, writing down the events of the day. He records the hours of prayer, the arrival of envoys, the deliveries of grain. His words are plain, even tedious, but they are the backbone of memory. Without such records, centuries collapse into rumor. He glances up at me, his eyes tired, and then returns to his task. He does not know that his small notes may one day help someone understand how we lived, how we watered the gardens, how we prayed, how we ate. The sun shifts westward, light angling through the lattice in narrow beams. Dust motes dance like tiny stars. I wander into another courtyard, where a teacher instructs a group of girls. Their mothers sit nearby, listening as he recites passages from the Quran. The girls repeat, their voices hesitant, then stronger. Their eyes are bright, their hands folded in their laps. One of them stumbles over a word and blushes. The teacher smiles gently. "Patience," he says. "Even the river took time to carve the mountain." It is easy to forget, when walking through arches and hearing fountains, that learning was the foundation of this place. Not only beauty, not only pleasure, but knowledge, astronomy, medicine, mathematics, poetry, scripture. Each subject has its place in the garden, as each channel has its bed. It may seem dull to some, dates, names, titles, lists. Yet together they form the bones of history, hidden beneath the fragrance of jasmine and the sparkle of water. I pass a stone bench where an elder sits, his hands folded on a cane. He speaks to no one, only watching the students as they recite, the scribes as they write, the craftsmen as they polish. His gaze is calm, patient. Perhaps he remembers when he too was a student in these halls, when he first heard the name of Aristotle, when he first learned how the stars move. Now he simply watches, content that knowledge is carried forward, even if imperfectly. As I leave the arcade, the garden opens before me again. The jasmine leans across the walls, blossoms white against the red plaster. The water glides through its channels, faithful as ever. I realize that history is not only in the rulers who built these palaces, but in the dull, patient labor of those who taught, copied, recited, measured, healed. Their voices may not carry through time as loudly as the clash of swords, but without them there would be nothing left to walk through. I pause at the fountain once more, listening to its steady voice. Then I whisper, almost to myself, "Knowledge is water. It flows, it nourishes, it survives." The breeze stirs, carrying the scent of mint and stone. I rise, and I walk on. Chapter 6. The Coming of Evening. The sun lowers and the light tilts golden across the garden. Shadows stretch longer. The arches cast deeper patterns, and the fountains glitter with fire where the drops catch the last blaze of the day. I walk slowly, for this hour does not hurry. It allows the garden to loosen, to breathe out what it has held since dawn. Near the western wall, women gather at the water's edge with baskets of fruit and herbs. Their voices carry softly, rising and falling like the rhythm of washing. They rinse figs, their skin splitting under the touch of water, and they lay them out on cloths to dry in the fading warmth. A girl beside them plucks mint leaves, crushing them in her hand to scent the air. She laughs when her fingers stain green. These small acts are as old as the palace, as old as the land itself. To some, they may seem unremarkable, but such tasks were what kept Andalusia alive: food, water, rhythm, care. I pause under an orange tree, its fruit glowing like small suns. The tree itself is not native to these hills. It came centuries ago, carried by traders along roads from the east. At first, the fruit was bitter, used more for medicine than for taste. Over time, grafting and patience softened it. To grow oranges here is to tell the story of exchange. Seeds carried in a traveler's pocket, roots pressed into strange soil, blossoms finding a new sky. Such details may seem tedious, but they are the threads that stitch history together. Trade routes, graphs, experiments, gardens as classrooms. The garden fills with movement now. A man tunes his oud, plucking strings until they hum low and steady. Another adjusts a darbuka drum, tapping lightly on its skin. Music is never far from evening in Granada. Under Yusuf I and Muhammad V, musicians were invited to these very courts to play for gatherings. Poets recited alongside them, their verses woven with melody. One scribe recorded that music here was as much a prayer as the bowing of the faithful. Not everyone agreed, of course. Jurists debated the place of music in faith. Some said it distracted from prayer, others insisted it lifted the soul. But here in the garden, music was allowed to breathe. I find a bench of cedar near the fountain and sit as the players begin. The oud sends out a ribbon of sound, deep and resonant, like water in a cavern. The ney answers with a thin, reedy sigh, as though the wind itself has taken voice. The drum joins last, not loud, but steady, a heartbeat beneath the song. Men pause in their walking, women lean closer together, children hush without being asked. The music curls upward into the arches, mingling with the fading light. A traveler once told me that the Alhambra was not built only of stone, but of silence shaped by sound. I believe him now. Music fills the spaces between the fountains and the call to prayer, stitching them together. It is a history of its own, not written on walls, but remembered in the body. As the musicians play, I recall the cultural flowering that once filled these courts. Under Muhammad V, scholars, poets, and artists were gathered deliberately, their work encouraged, their words carved into stone. Ibn Zamrak, the poet, wrote verses that still cling to the walls of the Court of the Lions. His lines praised not only rulers, but the gardens themselves, describing water as both servant and king, both substance and symbol. To read his words is to hear the garden speaking back. A group of boys runs past, chasing each other in circles around the fountain. One trips and falls, and the others pause, pulling him up, laughing as though the fall were part of the game. Their voices ripple like the water itself, playful yet steady. I smile because it is here, in children's laughter, in small accidents, that the continuity of history lies. The sultans built for eternity, but eternity is carried by boys with scraped knees. I move on, the music fading behind me, and enter a shaded gallery where lamps are being lit. Servants place small clay lamps along the arches, their flames catching on polished tiles. The glow softens the stone, turning geometry into warmth. In one corner, a young boy holds the wick too long and burns his fingers. He drops the lamp with a hiss, and the servant beside him scolds gently. The boy retrieves it, chastened, but wiser. Fire, like water, teaches quickly. The scent of food begins to drift into the garden. From the kitchens beyond the wall, smoke curls with hints of cumin, saffron, and roasted lamb. The cooks are busy now, preparing the evening meal. History records not only battles and dynasties, but also kitchens. It was here, in Andalusia, that flavors from the east met those of the west. Rice, sugar, citrus, and spices all mingled in pots. Even almonds, ground into pastes and sprinkled on sweets, came from far lands. Food is the quietest form of history, yet it endures longer than kings. I pass into a small courtyard where women sit with spindles, their fingers twisting wool into thread. They murmur as they work, speaking of children, of markets, of neighbors. Their work is patient, repetitive, dull to watch. Yet these threads wove the garments of the palace, the robes of scholars, the shawls of travelers. Without such patience, even the most splendid court would be naked. The women look up briefly as I pass, then return to their rhythm. Their presence, steady and humble, is as much a part of the Alhambra as any arch. A poet sits nearby, observing them. He scribbles onto a scrap of parchment, words tumbling out as the spindles turn. I glimpse a line. The thread of the world is spun in silence. He looks up at me, eyes alight. "Is it not true?" he asks. I nod because it is. History is thread, spun endlessly, woven into patterns we often do not notice until we step back. The light thins, evening coming gently. Birds flock to the cypress, their wings beating soft thunder as they settle. The garden hushes to make room for their arrival. A servant lights a brazier, the smoke curling upward, carrying the scent of cedar. He places it near a group of elders who sit cross-legged, their conversation quiet. One elder leans on his staff, telling the others of Yusufun's patronage of jurists, how he built madrasas so that law would guide the people as firmly as walls guide the garden. Another counters with a story of Muhammad V, how he rebuilt the mosque after it had been damaged, insisting it be more beautiful than before. They nod, debating history as though it were still unfolding. I walk toward the Court of the Lions, where shadows pool in the corners and the fountain glows faintly in the last light. The 12 marble lions stand silent, bearing the weight of centuries. Water spills from their mouths, steady, constant. I trail my fingers in the pool, and the ripples blur the reflection of arches and stars. The fountain was once a marvel, its waterwork a triumph of engineering. Channels lead the water in 4 directions, symbolizing the rivers of paradise. Scholars wrote treatises on its design, marveling at the balance of flow and pressure. To speak of hydraulics may bore the ear, but it is precisely this dull mastery that allows paradise to shine. A young man joins me at the fountain, his eyes bright. He explains that the lions were carved long before, perhaps by Jewish artisans, and that their presence here is a sign of the many hands that shaped this palace. Each stone is a conversation, he says. I nod, watching the water flow between the lions' paws. Indeed, history here is not single-voiced. It is a chorus. The sky darkens, stars beginning to prick the blue. Lamps glow brighter, and the air cools. A storyteller gathers children near a fig tree, his voice rising in cadence. He speaks of Muhammad I, who first chose this hill in 1238. He tells of battles won, alliances made, treaties signed. The children fidget, some listening, some distracted. One picks at the figs in a basket, another yawns. But the storyteller continues, knowing that memory does not always awaken in the moment. Sometimes it sleeps until years later, when the scent of figs or the sound of a fountain wakes it. I sit at the edge of the circle, letting the voice carry me. His tale is filled with dates and names, perhaps dull to some, yet in the cadence, in the rhythm, even dull facts become a lullaby. Night is close now. The garden glimmers with lamplight, the fountains whispering steady as ever. The call to prayer rises once more, softer, wrapping the palace in remembrance. I close my eyes and breathe with it. the rhythm of faith and history weaving together. When I open them, I see the jasmine blossoms glowing pale in the dark, their scent stronger now than by day. The garden has shifted its voice. What was brightness becomes hush. What was knowledge becomes memory. What was day becomes rest. So let us walk on into the evening. There are more lessons still, more stories, more silences. For history does not end when the sun sets. It lingers in the cool air, in the stars above, in the water that never ceases. Chapter 7. The Night of Lamps and Stars. The day has folded itself into shadow, and the garden wears a quieter face. The fountains still sing, the jasmine still breathes, but their voices are gentler, softened by the cool of night. Lamps burn along the arcades, their flames trembling in the breeze, painting the tiles with shifting gold. Above, the first stars pierce the deepening blue, each one a reminder that heaven leans close to earth. I walk slowly along a tiled path, my sandals brushing faintly against the stone. The air is cooler now, touched by dew. In the distance, a door creaks as it is closed, and the sound echoes like a note struck on an oud. The palace does not sleep at once. It changes pace, allowing the night to gather itself. In one courtyard, I find a group of astronomers with their instruments. Brass astrolabes gleam in the lamplight, their discs carved with delicate circles and star names. A man holds his up against the sky, aligning its ret with the bright star Vega. He murmurs to his companions, pointing out the tilt of the heavens, the hour hidden in the sky. Another man unfurls a parchment chart, its edges curled, its ink smudged from years of use. They speak of latitude, declination, the movements of planets. To many these words are dry, numbers that weigh down the tongue. But here they are maps of wonder. Granada itself breathes with the stars, its prayers timed by their arc, its seasons measured by their path. One of the astronomers notices me and gestures me closer. He shows me how the astrolabe works, the discs turning, the pointers aligning, the heavens reduced to a wheel of brass. With this, he says, you may tell the hour even in darkness. You may find your way when the road is hidden. You may measure what cannot be touched. His voice is calm, his hands steady. Knowledge, he reminds me, is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers through metal and sky. Nearby a boy yawns, leaning against a column as his father explains the chart of constellations. The boy's eyes glaze, half dreaming already. He does not know it yet, but these dull lines, these patient lessons, will return to him years later, when he lifts his eyes to the sky alone. I move on and find another courtyard where poetry is being recited. Cushions are spread on the ground, lamps placed in niches, shadows flickering on the plaster. A man with a clear voice recites verses of Ibn Zamrak, the poet of this very palace. His words are carved into the walls, but tonight they float in the air, alive again. He speaks of water that glides like pearls, of walls that shine like the stars, of paradise mirrored in stone. The listeners lean closer, murmuring approval, their eyes shining. A woman follows with her own verse, her voice softer, but no less steady. She speaks not of rulers or palaces, but of the jasmine, of the way its scent lingers after nightfall, of how memory itself is perfumed. Her words are not carved on walls, but they find their place in the listeners' hearts. Poetry here is not just ornament, it is the record of breath and longing. Children gather at the edge, some mimicking the words, others distracted by the flicker of lamps. A boy tugs at his sister's sleeve, whispering that he wishes to go chase fireflies in the garden. She hushes him, though her own eyes wander to the shadows. I smile, for even in boredom, children carry history forward. One day, the verses they half heard tonight will resurface in their own words. From the poetry gathering, I follow the sound of string and drum. Musicians sit under a trellis heavy with vine, their instruments glowing in lamplight. The oud hums deep. The rebab sings with its bow. The darbuka holds the rhythm like a heartbeat. Men and women sit nearby, sipping sherbet from copper cups, their voices low, their bodies swaying gently. Music at night is less formal, less bound. It drifts like incense, filling the spaces left empty by day. I recall how the courts of Andalusia were once famous for such gatherings. In Córdoba, in Seville, in Granada itself, rulers invited musicians and poets to share their art, blending faith with joy, devotion with delight. Some jurists objected, insisting that music tempted the soul away from prayer. But the rulers knew that joy, too, is part of paradise. And so they allowed the notes to rise, even in the shadow of the mosque. I pause to watch the musicians. One plucks a melody that reminds me of water sliding over stone. Another answers with a flourish like wind among leaves. The listeners nod, lost in the weave of sound. I close my eyes, and for a moment the garden itself seems to hum along. The fountains keeping rhythm, the stars offering silence. As the music fades, I wander toward a smaller court where lamps burn low. A group of scribes sit in a circle, copying by lamplight. Their reed pens scratch steadily across parchment, the ink gleaming wet. One writes out verses of the Quran, each letter shaped with devotion. Another copies a commentary on law, his lines cramped but careful. A third works on a collection of poetry, the script flowing like water. Their task is slow, tedious to some, yet it is here that memory is kept alive. Without such work, the words of prophets and poets alike would vanish into dust. One of the scribes rubs his wrist, weary from hours of work. He looks up, meeting my gaze, and smiles faintly. The hand grows tired, he says, but the word endures. He dips his pen again, the ink catching the lamplight. His devotion humbles me. To copy is not glamorous, but it is what allows the past to reach the future. I sit for a while, listening to the scratch of pens, the flutter of parchment, the murmur of quiet voices. It is like sitting beside a river, slow, steady, carrying what must be carried. Leaving the scribes, I step into the open again. The stars are brighter now, filling the sky with silver. The air cools further, touched with the faint scent of night-blooming flowers. I hear laughter from a distant courtyard where servants share food and stories after their work. Their voices rise, unguarded, free. History often forgets such voices, but they are as much a part of this place as the sultans and poets. It is the hands of servants that filled the fountains, tended the gardens, carried the lamps. Without them, no ruler could have built paradise. I walk to the great pool at the center of the garden. Its surface is still, reflecting the arches, the lamps, the stars above. I kneel, letting my fingers brush the water. Ripples spread outward, breaking the reflection, then smoothing again. I drop a jasmine blossom into the pool, and it drifts, pale against the dark. For a moment, I see the stars floating on water, heaven resting in the palm of the garden. A group of elders sits nearby, their rosaries clicking softly as they pray. One of them looks up at the pool and says, "The world is like this," disturbed for a moment, but always returning to stillness. His companions nod, their fingers moving steadily over the beads. Their prayers are low, barely more than breath, yet they seem to fill the courtyard with a weight of calm. I rise and walk along the rill that leads from the pool. The water glimmers, silver now instead of gold. I follow it to a small alcove where a storyteller has gathered listeners. His voice rises and falls as he recounts the history of Granada, the battles fought, the treaties signed, the rulers crowned. He names Muhammad I, Yusuf I, Muhammad V. He speaks of alliances with Christian kingdoms, of betrayals, of triumphs. To some, these lists may sound dull, only names and dates. But in his voice they become part of the air, stitched into the night like threads of memory. Children doze against their mother's shoulders, half hearing, half dreaming. One boy stirs, whispering, "Tell the part about the lions." The storyteller smiles and recounts the tale of the court of the lions, of its fountain, its marvel of engineering. The boy's eyes widen, then close again as sleep claims him. Even in dreams, history walks beside us. The night deepens, the garden softer now. Lamps burn lower, stars brighter. I sit on a marble bench, letting the cool stone steady me. The jasmine leans against the walls, its blossoms glowing faintly in the dark. The water continues, faithful, constant. Here in this palace, history is not loud. It is not the clash of swords or the shouting of crowds. It is the patient rhythm of prayer, the slow copying of books, the steady work of hands. It is dull, perhaps, to those who seek only drama. But dullness is where endurance lives. Without it, the palace would have fallen long ago. I close my eyes and breathe with the garden. The lamps flicker, the stars watch, the fountains sing. And I think to myself, night is not an ending. It is a turning of the page. So let us walk further into the night, for history does not sleep. It whispers, steady and patient, waiting to be heard. Chapter 8, Midnight Watch. The palace has grown hushed. What was busy with scholars and poets, masons and gardeners, now lies beneath a quieter veil. The lamps burn lower, their flames smaller, their light no longer chasing shadow, but folding into it. The fountains remain steady, their music softer in the night, as if they too respect the silence that comes when the hour leans past midnight. I walk alone now, though I am not alone. The garden holds company enough. The stars above, the water below, the scent of jasmine thickening in the cool air. Each step falls lightly, for the tiles themselves seem to be sleeping. At the far end of a courtyard, I see the watchmen gather. They are men in plain robes, carrying spears that gleam faintly in the lamplight. Their task is simple, dull to some: to circle the palace, to keep the peace, to ensure that no fire breaks out, no thief creeps in, no mischief disturbs the Sultan's rest. One yawns, rubbing his eyes, another adjusts his belt, a third begins his slow round along the covered walk. This, too, is history. Not the glorious kind sung by poets, but the patient kind written by footsteps. A palace as grand as this stands only because men guard it, night after night, year after year. The watchman's spear may never be raised in anger, but his presence is as necessary as the water in the channels. Without him, the silence would not feel safe. I pause to greet one of them, a man with lines around his eyes deeper than most carved into stone. He tells me that he has walked these halls since the reign of Yusuf I, nearly 3 decades past. He remembers when the court of the lions was still being carved, when the plaster still smelled damp from the mason's hands. He laughs softly. "I am like the cypress," he says. "I have stood in the same place long enough to watch the garden grow around me." His words remind me that history is not only made by rulers who command, but also by those who endure. From the courtyard of guards, I wander toward a terrace where the stars pour themselves into the sky. The Sierra Nevada is faint in the distance, its peaks silver with snow even under the darkness. Astronomers sometimes come here to read the heavens, but tonight they are gone. Their astrolabes are packed away, their parchments rolled, their debates resting. The stars, however, remain, unbothered by absence. I tilt my head back and breathe, letting their silence fill me. I recall what a scholar once told me, that the stars are more faithful than kings. Dynasties rise and fall, but Orion's belt will always shine above the horizon at winter's turn. For the rulers of Granada, the stars served as both guides and symbols. Alignments marked festivals, prayers, and seasons of harvest. Without them, no one could say when to plant, when to reap, when to begin the fasting month of Ramadan. Astronomy here was not just wonder, it was survival. I picture Muhammad V himself, standing perhaps on this very terrace decades ago, consulting his scholars. He would have asked them, "When shall we break the fast? When will the moon be new? When will the night of power fall?" These questions, answered by the stars, ruled the rhythm of the court as surely as any decree. To some, the work of astronomers is dry, tedious, but here their lines and numbers carved the days into meaning. Moving from the terrace, I returned to the courtyards, where only a few lamps still burn. I hear the faint scrape of reed pens and find a pair of scribes still working by night. Their eyes are heavy, but they persist, copying the Quran line by line. I ask why they do not rest, and one replies that his commission is due for the Sultan's inspection in the morning. His voice carries no complaint. He sees his labor as prayer. The other scribe says nothing, only dips his pen again, steady as a heartbeat. I sit with them for a while, listening to the scratch of pen against parchment. The sound is small but constant, like insects humming in summer grass. It reminds me again that history is not only the loud triumphs, but also the quiet persistence of tired hands. When I rise, I pass along the rill where the water glimmers faintly with starlight. It divides, runs beneath an arch, and carries me toward the kitchens. Even at this hour, the place is not entirely silent. A faint glow seeps from within. I peek through and see servants preparing for the dawn meal. Bread is being kneaded, pots are soaking, herbs laid out. The work of feeding hundreds does not sleep. These men and women are not remembered in chronicles, but without them the palace would falter in a day. One servant sees me and smiles. He lifts a basket of figs, offering one. I take it, the skin cool, the taste sweet, even in the dark. We exchange no more words, for words are not always needed. In that moment, I know that this too is the making of history, the sharing of food, the keeping of rhythm, the unseen hands that make grandeur possible. From the kitchens, I wander into a quieter corner where the baths are housed. The lamps are dim, but the pools still steam. A lone attendant checks the water, adjusting the flow with a wooden lever. He explains that the temperature must be kept steady even at night, for the Sultan or his guests may come without warning. I trail my hand along the marble lip of the pool, warm beneath my fingers. The sound of dripping echoes in the chamber, each drop like a clock marking time. Baths, I remember, were among the greatest legacies of the Moors in Spain. In every city, from Córdoba to Seville to Granada, they built these places of cleansing and rest. To the Christian kingdoms, such habits once seemed excessive, even suspicious. But to us, water is purity, both physical and spiritual. To step into a bath is to wash not only dust, but also the weight of the day. Even now, centuries later, the tiles here glisten, the air scented faintly of mint and steam. Leaving the baths, I step back into the open night. The palace lies mostly dark now, save for the fountains and the stars. I pass under the arches of the Court of the Lions. The 12 carved beasts lie silent, their fountains stilled at this hour. In the moonlight, they seem alive, their marble backs gleaming faintly, their faces solemn. I recall hearing that some saw them as strange, even forbidden, for lions are not common in our lands. But Muhammad V insisted on their presence, and they remain as guardians of this court, carrying the weight of water as if it were the weight of heaven itself. I sit by the lions and think of the engineers who built this fountain, who calculated each channel, who balanced the pressure so that the water would flow evenly from every mouth. Their work was not loud, not praised in poetry, but it was precise, delicate, enduring. Without them, this marvel would have been only stone. With them, it became living water. The night deepens further. A silence settles even heavier now, broken only by the occasional splash of a fountain or the soft rustle of wind through cypress. I walk toward a smaller garden where I find an elderly gardener tending still. He is stooped, his beard white, his robe patched. With a small lamp he checks the soil, touching it with his fingers, murmuring to himself. I ask why he works so late. He smiles and says, "The garden does not sleep." Why should I? He explains that water must be shifted in the cool of night, that plants must be watched for signs of thirst or illness. His devotion is quiet, almost invisible, yet it is men like him who keep paradise alive. He shows me a bed of mint, pointing out leaves that are healthy, others that are not. He names remedies: ash for pests, lime for balance, patience for all. His words are plain, almost dull, but in them lies the wisdom of years. I thank him, and he bows, returning to his work. As I leave him, I realize the garden itself is a watchman. It does not sleep. The water runs, the leaves breathe, the soil shifts. All through the night, life continues, unseen by most. Finally, I return to a marble bench and sit, letting the cool stone hold me. The stars shimmer above, the fountains murmur below. I close my eyes and breathe, the rhythm of the palace settling into me. Midnight is not silence, I realize. It is another kind of song, one softer, steadier, less noticed, but it carries us all the same. Here, in this night, history is not a roar. It is a whisper, the whisper of pens scratching, of sandals circling, of water gliding, the whisper of breath, of prayer, of stone settling into itself. To listen is enough. So walk with me still if you wish. The night is not yet over. There are more secrets to find, more dull facts waiting to become beauty. For history does not tire. It keeps vigil, like the watchmen, like the gardeners, like the stars. And so shall we. Chapter 9. The Return of Dawn. The night has stretched long, and the garden has carried me through its quiet hours. Now in the east, the first thin line of light appears. It is pale at first, almost uncertain but steady. The stars begin to withdraw one by one, as though bowing before the new king of the sky. The lamps along the arcades flicker low, their flames tired, their duty done. I rise from the marble bench where I have sat for what feels like both a breath and an eternity. My robe is damp with dew, and my hand leaves a dark print on the stone as I steady myself. The garden shifts with the dawn, not suddenly, but like a slow inhalation. The fountains continue, their voices brighter now. Water reflects the faint rose of morning. The channels glisten as if awake. The jasmine stirs, its perfume richer in the cool air. I take a step, then another, moving back toward the court of the lions, where the first sunray touches the marble beasts. Their backs glow as though fire had entered the stone. The fountain, silent through the deepest night, stirs again. Thin streams begin to rise, each mouth of each lion releasing its song. The court greets the sun. It was under Muhammad V, they say, that this court was completed, in the very heart of the 14th century. Scholars argue whether the lions were inspired by Jewish craftsmen from earlier dynasties, or whether they were drawn from visions of paradise described in the Quran. The debate seems endless, and perhaps dull to some, but I see in it proof that memory clings to details as stubbornly as ivy to a wall. Even now, centuries later, we seek to explain what stands before us. Perhaps the truth is simpler, that beauty sometimes needs no reason but itself. I sit by the lions and watch as the water rises higher, clear streams shimmering in the new light. The fountain is more than a marvel of engineering. It is a symbol of balance. 12 beasts carrying one basin, each equal, each steady. The water does not favor one mouth over another. It flows evenly, like justice made liquid. I leave the court and wander into a colonnade where servants are already beginning their day. A boy sweeps dew from the tiles. his reed broom making soft music against the floor. A woman carries baskets of bread, still warm from the ovens, the scent curling through the air. A man lights a small brazier to heat water for tea. Their voices are quiet, their movements steady. The palace wakes not with clamour, but with rhythm. I pause to greet an old gardener, the same one I found tending mint by lamplight. His lamp is gone, replaced by a shaft of sun falling across his bent back. He smiles when he sees me. The garden thanks the night, he says, but it also thanks the day. He lifts a handful of damp soil, letting it crumble through his fingers. Now the roots will drink. His devotion humbles me again. Walking onward, I pass through a gate where scholars are gathering with scrolls. Their debate has already begun, though the sun is scarcely above the horizon. One argues about the lineage of rulers, tracing names with his finger on the parchment. Another insists on the importance of recording not only sultans, but also the laws they passed. Their voices are patient, but firm. To an untrained ear it may sound tedious. Lists of names, dates, decrees. Yet I know these details are the bones of memory. Without them, history would dissolve like ink in water. One scholar lifts his gaze and quotes an old verse carved above the arch. There is no conqueror but God. His students nod, some fervently, others sleepily. The lesson is clear. Dynasties may rise and fall, but what endures is not their armies, but the words they leave behind. I move from their voices into a smaller courtyard where artisans are already at work. The plasterers begin early before the sun grows hot. They carry buckets of wet lime, their hands white with dust. One smooths the wall with a trowel, explaining to his apprentice that plaster must be laid in layers, thin and even, to prevent cracks. His words are not poetry, they are instruction. Yet in them I hear the rhythm of centuries. Without such diligence, the walls would have crumbled long ago. Nearby, a tile maker polishes fragments of glazed squares. Their colors catch the morning: cobalt, turquoise, emerald, amber. He sets them into a pattern on the ground before fixing them into place. Each tile, he says, is a piece of sky brought to earth. His apprentice yawns, unimpressed. I smile, knowing that years later the boy will repeat the same phrase to another child. Knowledge is often carried in boredom. The sun has risen higher now, its light spilling fully into the gardens. Birds stir, filling the air with song. I walk to the great reflecting pool, where the cypress trees stand like green pillars. Their reflections shimmer in the water, so perfect they seem to be a second world. I kneel at the pool's edge, my hand brushing the surface. The ripples scatter the image, then heal it again. History feels like this to me, disturbed, broken, yet always returning to a greater whole. A group of women arrives with baskets of fruit, oranges, pomegranates, figs. They rinse them in the pool, the water brightening their colors. One laughs, saying that even fruit wishes to be bathed in paradise before eaten. Another begins slicing pomegranates, their red seeds scattering like jewels into a bowl. The fruit was praised by the Prophet himself, they remind each other. To eat it is to taste a fragment of eternity. I move on, drawn by the sound of voices. In a shaded court, a teacher gathers children around him. His voice is calm, his lesson simple. The 4 rivers of paradise, the gardens promised to the faithful, the duties of prayer and honesty. The children fidget, some chasing each other's sleeves, others staring at birds above. He doesn't scold them. He knows that lessons are seeds, and seeds sprout in their own time. Even boredom carries wisdom, hidden until later. As I watch, I recall how rulers of Granada once made education a pillar of their reign. Schools were built beside mosques, scholars invited from across the Maghreb, books copied and preserved. The sultans knew that stone and water build palaces, but knowledge builds legacies. Without it, a dynasty is no more than dust. Leaving the court, I find myself at the outer wall where the view stretches over Granada itself. The city lies below, roofs clustered, smoke rising from early fires. The sound of church bells from Christian quarters mingles faintly with the call to prayer from mosques. Here, at the meeting of worlds, history is alive in every street. The Nasrid rulers knew this well. They built their palaces not in isolation, but as crowns above their cities, reminders of power and faith. I stand at the wall as the sun rises fully, golden light pouring across the valley. The Sierra Nevada gleams white in the distance, eternal and silent. Below, the Darro River threads silver through the city, carrying water from mountain to garden, from garden to man. I breathe deeply, filling my lungs with the cool air, my eyes with the morning's promise. I turn back into the palace one final time. The courtyards are alive now with servants, scholars, artisans, children. The silence of the night has given way to the hum of the day. Yet the water still flows, steady as ever. The jasmine still blooms, unhurried. The arches still stand, carved with their verses. Nothing here is rushed, not even history. I sit again by the first fountain where my walk began. The same water greets me, though the light upon it has changed. I watch it rise, fall, ripple, shine. Around me voices swell, cooks calling, scribes debating, gardeners instructing. The palace breathes, just as it did yesterday, just as it will tomorrow. I place my hand upon the marble and close my eyes. In this moment, I feel all who came before me. The masons who cut stone, the scribes who copied words, the poets who recited verses, the guards who kept watch, the servants who carried baskets, the rulers who dreamed of paradise. Their names may be forgotten, but their presence is not. It lingers in the water, in the stone, in the jasmine-scented air. The sun is full now, and the day has begun. My walk has carried me from morning to night, from silence to song, from shadow to light. The garden has taught me more than books, more than teachers, more than kings. It has taught me that history is not always glory. Often it is patience, repetition, dullness even. But in patience lies endurance. In repetition lies strength. And in dullness lies the thread that binds centuries together. I rise at last. My robe brushes the tiles. My sandals whisper against the path. I look once more at the water, faithful, endless. "Come," I whisper, though no one stands beside me. "The garden is never finished. It is always beginning again." And with the sun climbing higher, I walk out through the archway, carrying with me the silence, the history, and the promise of return.